Hello and welcome into the ETSN podcast. I'm Clint Buckley, and as always, I'm joined by Chandler Vessels. It's time to talk about the second round of the playoffs. It was an eventful first round. We have some teams that really impressed us. A few surprises, but I want to talk about the Big Four, what I'm calling the Big Four anyway, and how they did in the first round of the playoffs. Longview, Lufkin, Carthage, and Newton. I think you will agree these are our four pound for pound best teams in the area. I think the teams that we feel like have a legitimate chance of winning a state title. And we'll start off with Longview. 70-22 last week over Copper's Cove. Saw that game in person. Longview scored 35 points in the first 10.5 minutes of the game.
Yeah.
It was 56-0 at halftime. Longview just keeps rolling along on offense. They're averaging 53 points per game, 520 yards per game, and it's balanced. They average about 280 rushing and got 230 passing.
Yeah.
Haynes King, 32 touchdowns, only one interception this year. They got Prosper this week. Prosper's 9-2, and they're going to play that game at 7 p.m. Friday at the Star, the Ford Center in Frisco. It's kind of an odd location for this game. One, the Ford Center is 13 miles away from the Prosper High School campus. And two, it's kind of a small venue for a game of this magnitude, a 6A playoff game. Longview it only holds 12,000, and it's 6,000 on each side. Longview has already sold out its allotment of 6,000 tickets. And as I mentioned, it's 13 miles away from Prosper's campus, so you can imagine that they're going to bring a lot of people into that game. So crowd noise is definitely going to be a factor. It gets loud in there. You've been in there for games. When it's full, it's a very loud place because it's so compact that there's not a lot of not a lot of room for the noise to escape. It's going to be right down on the field. So looking forward to that one. I'll be there Saturday night at the Ford Center in Frisco for Longview Prosper. Lufkin, they're 10-1. They overcame a slow start last week to defeat McKinney North. The offense, which I don't think we've talked that much about this year, mainly because the defense steals all the headlines from them, but 541 yards of offense, including 356 yards on the ground. They face a Frisco Lone Star team, which is 9-2. They had spent some time ranked in the top 10 this year. 2 p.m. Saturday at McLean Stadium in Waco. Lone Star, we talk about defenses and Lufkin's. Lone Star's defense allowing less than 9 points per game. And one of their big games this year, one of their losses against Highland Park, which is ranked number 2, a team that Lufkin could end up facing later on in the playoffs. That was a 10-7 game. Highland Park was able to win. So don't expect too many points Saturday between Lufkin and Lone Star with those two defenses. Carthage, 11-0, ranked number 1, 37-game winning streak. It was a 14-14 game in the second quarter, but Carthage just went nuts over the next 10 minutes. They scored 35 points to break it open. Gunnar Capps, 5 touchdown passes. Another incredible season for the Carthage quarterback. I believe he's up, 33 touchdown passes, I believe now? You're doing the stats.
Yeah, it's 33.
33. So 3 of those last week went to Kel Williams, who's emerged as a second option in the passing game behind Kelvonte Dixon, who had 2 touchdowns last week. Don't expect too much trouble for Carthage this week. They have Huffman Hargrave, which is 6-5, 7 p.m. Friday in Lufkin. And then Newton, save the best for last, Chandler, 10-0. No trouble last week against Paul Pewitt, 69-0.
Yeah, I mean, Darwin Barlow had 209 yards and 4 touchdowns on only 10 carries. It's
21 yards a carry.
I'm not sure what his average is for the season, but that's pretty on pace with what he's been doing this year. And Newton's just been dominating teams with their Division I guys that they have. That not only Barlow, but they've got Josh Foster and James Sylvester and Caden Walker too, who are all going to D1 schools. I think this is going to keep happening.
Yeah.
Until we get to the state championship. I don't think anybody's going to challenge Newton, so they're gonna face Grand Saline.
Nice season for them. They're in the playoffs for the first time in a while. They actually won a playoff game last week, but it's Newton.
Yeah,
I mean,
I feel bad for Grand Saline for running into Newton.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take some kind of effort to dethrone these guys one of these days. I don't think it's going to happen in this calendar year. Maybe next year, but not this year.
Yeah.
Like I said, they play Grand Saline 3 p.m. Friday in Henderson in the second round of the playoffs. Now on to this week's games. We have 5 games that we're going to talk about, and we'll start off in 5A Division I. This is an interesting one. John Tyler against Lancaster. They're going to play at 2 o'clock Saturday at Mesquite Memorial Stadium. Chandler, you'll be covering this game. What are you looking forward to the most?
Yeah, I'll start out by just sort of talking about Lancaster and what they bring to the table and what John Tyler will have to look out for. They've got a running back, Trey Bradford, who's over 1,000 yards this season and had a huge game last week in the first round, 384 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. So definitely going to want to keep an eye on him. They do like to run the ball a lot. They've got him and another back who's around 600 yards. And looking at their quarterbacks, he's at 672 yards, 5 touchdowns. So it seems like they like to run the ball a lot more. And especially after the game that he had last week, John Tyler's defense is definitely going to want to be on notice about him. But as far as John Tyler goes, I was at their game last week, and they just seem like they've been playing really well the past 2 or 3, 4 weeks. Their offense has been on fire in the past 3 games. They're averaging 521.6 yards per game, 45.3 points per game. And they've been doing it with a lot of balance. I mean, Devlin Woods is starting to come on. Keandre Street is starting to come on after serving a 1-game suspension. And their running backs have been really balanced. I mean, Rod Hawkins in 3 of the past 5 games has at least 100 yards rushing, and 4 of the past 5 games has at least 100 total yards. And 2 of those games were 200-yard games. Right. Him and Cam Grant and the other players that they mix in back there, they're not really having to give him a lot of carries either. Right. I think he had around 11 or 12 carries last game.
That's basically what it's been for Rod Hawkins this year. I mean, he's their leading rusher, but, the most he'll get maybe is 15 carries in a game because they have so many other guys that they can get the ball to. Yeah,
that's what really impressed me was just how many different weapons that offense has. And if they're all on like they were last week and have been the past 2 or 3 weeks, I don't see Lancaster being able to stop them. I think John Tyler is going to be able to come away with this game. A really big key is going to be how their defense plays, just mentioning that running back. And last week they had a really good performance, a couple of sacks for Braylon Yarber, and then Roy Lampton forced a couple turnovers for them. They held them to 3 points in the first half, and then second half they had a big lead. Maybe they kind of let off the gas and gave up a couple touchdowns. One of those touchdowns was late in the fourth quarter. So, but if their defense is able to play at that same level and how their offense has been playing, I really like John Tyler to win this game, and I believe they'd face Lufkin in the third round, so that'd be a really good matchup for us.
Yeah, it would be. Now moving on to 5A Division II, doubleheader Friday at NRG Stadium in Houston, featuring a couple of East Texas teams, starting off with Marshall and Nederland at 4 p.m. Friday. This one's interesting for me because if you'd have told me that these 2 teams would have met in the second round of the playoffs maybe 6 weeks ago, I would have said, okay, this is where the season ends for Marshall, because at that point Nederland was undefeated. And really had you didn't really see any weaknesses in their game. And Marshall, while, they had gotten off to a great start in district, we saw what what happened when they went up against quality teams in non-district, like Longview and Carthage. They struggled. And, but the way Marshall has played the last 5 or 6 weeks, it gives me a little bit of pause. Who knows how far Marshall can go in the playoffs. And, Nederland has had a couple of close encounters. They lost their season finale to Port Neches Groves, their only loss of the year, and then they had to rally in their bi-district win last week against Fort Bend Willow Ridge, 22-16. Not a whole lot of offense to speak of for Nederland the last couple of weeks. So, and that's one thing when you're playing Marshall, you're going to have to score because Marshall is going to score. They have a dynamic dual threat quarterback, as we've talked about all season long in this podcast, J.J. Green. Who's capable of beating teams both through the air and on the ground with his legs. And when you have 3 Division I caliber receivers to throw to, like Taj Washington, DeKendrick Bender, and Savion Williams, it's hard for defenses to stop. And I think Nederland is going to have to really key in on those receivers. I don't think with their offense, the way they've struggled the last couple of weeks, they're going to afford to be able to get into a shootout with Marshall. Yeah. So they're going to have to keep the big plays in check and keep those receivers from kind of running wild back there in the secondary. That's the first game at NRG Stadium Friday involving an East Texas team. The next one at 8 o'clock, it's Lindale versus Port Neches Groves. I'm excited to see this game for 2 reasons. One, I haven't seen Lindale all year, and they've been one of those teams that have really surprised me. I don't know. I mean, you saw them in person. With the way they've played, they finished second in that district. A nice season at 7-4. They started off kind of rough. They lost their season opener to Kaufman, gave up 52 points, I believe. Struggled against Van in non-district, but have since come around and played great football down the stretch. And they're going to be going up against one of the best and most exciting players in the state of Texas, in P&G quarterback Roschon Johnson, a senior who is committed to Texas, a true dual-threat quarterback. 247sports.com ranks him as the 4th best dual-threat quarterback in the nation. So Lindale's defense is going to have its hands full. I was looking up some numbers on Johnson this year. He missed one game earlier in the season due to an ankle injury. So in 10 games, he has, I want to say, a little over 2,000 yards passing, 23 touchdowns, and he's run for like 1,200 yards and 20-something touchdowns. So he's the definition of a dual-threat guy. He's had a game where he's thrown for 380 yards, and he's had a game where he's run for 260 yards. So, I mean, he's thrown for 4 touchdown passes in a game, and he's run for 5 in a game. So it's kind of a pick-your-poison scenario for Lindale's defense against Roschon Johnson. That's the key. I mean, Lindale is going to have to figure out a way to contain him and not let him just run wild. And Lindale has had trouble on defense this year. They played well against White House, but the closest thing that they have seen to Roschon Johnson earlier this year was J.J. Green, and J.J. Green had a really good game against them.
Yeah.
So it's going to be important for Lindale to, I guess, with an athlete like him, you got to take away one or the other. You got to take away the big plays downfield with the passing game, or you got to take away his running ability. Now that's easier said than done with an athlete his caliber, but that's going to be the ball game for Lindale. Lindale has weapons of its own on offense, so it's not like they're scared to get into a shootout or anything like that. Dylan Heineman, what a season he's had. 2,700 yards passing, 30 touchdowns. Had a huge game last week in their win over Montgomery in the playoffs. Jordan Jenkins, the running back, I think is going to be a key in this game. Lindale is going to want to limit the amount of possessions that P&G offense has, and in order to do that, they're going to need to kind of slow it down a little bit on offense and feed the ball to Jordan Jenkins. So looking forward to that one Friday night. A little East Texas doubleheader at NRG Stadium. Beast Texas invades Houston, Marshall, Nederland, Lindale, Port Neches, Groves. And then onto the smaller schools, we got a 3A Division I matchup, a very exciting Division I matchup between Jefferson and Malikov.
Yeah, Malikov could be one of the better teams that Jefferson's played all season. Jefferson really hasn't been tested other than outside of a close game with Mount Vernon this year.
Yep.
And the opener against Pittsburgh. But TQ Jackson came on last week.
Boy, did he ever.
Yeah, 126 yards, 2 touchdowns. And he's kind of not struggled, but it's been because of injuries to the quarterback.
Inconsistency at the quarterback position.
It's not on him, but to see him have a game like that, it gives you a little bit of an idea of just how good Jefferson can be when he's going. And then, of course, D. Black had over 200 yards once again last week. I know he's done that a few times this year. He had a couple touchdowns as well.
That guy's a dude.
Yeah, he's been up at the top of our leading rushers all season long.
He's closing in on 2,000, isn't he?
Yeah. And he's just been doing that every week, it seems like. He's been their most consistent player on offense by far. And Jefferson's able to put up a lot of points on offense because of those two guys, and then all the other weapons they have. Trey Hodge at quarterback, and then Tybal Williams is also coming in at running back every now and then. Kylan Thomas, who filled in for Hodge when he was injured. Jefferson struggled a little bit at the beginning of the game last week against Mineola, but then they came on and won 41-22.
Hashtag too many dudes.
Yeah, it's just too much for Mineola to handle. But Malikov's had a good season. They're 8-2. I wasn't able to get any stats on them. I couldn't find anything.
I know they can score because just looking at last week's playoff result against a pretty good Pottsboro team, I think they were 7-3 going into that one. 7-4 now with the 63-35 win for Malikov last week. This game I think has the potential to be up and down, kind of a shootout.
Yeah, especially because Jefferson's missing defensive lineman Eric Gibson, who's been their leader in sacks and really their leader on defense all year. He tore his MCL and was out for the season a couple weeks ago. So that's a big loss for them, and especially with the way that Malikov's offense has been playing, like you mentioned, I was able to find that they're averaging 44.5 points per game. So missing a player like that on defense and going up against an offense
can
like
make a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
All right, one more game to talk about, and this is very intriguing to me anyway. Chandler, you'll be covering this game Friday night. It's a Class 2A Division I area playoff between the undefeated Carlisle Indians and the Joaquin Rams.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a shame that these two teams have to meet so early because I feel like they're both really two of our better teams in 2A. But Carlisle's been rolling all season. They really haven't been challenged by anyone. Joaquin got off to that hot start where they
4 straight shutouts to begin the year.
Yeah, 4 straight shutouts. They haven't been on that pace all season long.
Although they started the playoffs with a shutout.
Yeah. So the Rams' defense is one to watch out for, but Carlisle's defense isn't too bad either. I mean, they're giving up just 6.9 points per game all season.
I think it's going to be. I think the game's going to be. The final score is going to be more than like 7-6, though.
Yeah, I mean, these two teams have too much on offense to not score. But speaking of which, Gerald Turner, what a season he's had on offense for Carlisle. Really on offense and defense. I mean, he's at 2,500 total yards, 43 total touchdowns, and then on defense he also has 3 picks, a couple touchdowns, and 3 fumble recoveries. So two-way player, definitely their best player by far. He's going to be one to watch for. But the thing that makes Carlisle's offense so potent is it's not just him.
Right.
They've got Jay Price, who's at 800 yards receiving, a little bit over 800 yards, 8 touchdowns. And then I'm sure this guy's related to Gerald in some way, but Jamion Turner or Jamion Turner.
Yeah, Carlisle's a small place, so the fact that there are 2 Turners, I mean, they're probably related.
Yeah, but he's been the second leading back. I mean, I guess he's their starting running back because Turner plays quarterback, but he's got 800 yards rushing, 20 touchdowns as well. So you can't just focus on Turner because then those other 2 guys are gonna burn you. They're putting up 52.6 points per game on offense. I really like Carlisle this season, but Joaquin is one of those teams that on offense where they like to run the ball. They've only attempted 24 passes,
and that's going to be key this week. Yeah, if they can control the clock and keep that Carlisle offense off the field. Joaquin's defense is good, by the way.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't see Carlisle putting up 52 points on Friday.
Yeah,
but I don't think Joaquin can win a shootout either with Carlisle. So they're going to have to limit the amount of possessions, I feel like, for Carlisle's offense.
Yeah. And they've got a couple guys over 1,000 yards, Hunter Gates and Connor Bragg. So if those guys are able to get 4 or 5 yards every time and keep the clock going and really lengthen that time of possession for Joaquin, that'll definitely help them out. And because, like you said, you don't want Carlisle's offense on the field that much. So.
All right, well, it should be a fun week. Before we get out of here, we want to give a shout-out to our offensive and defensive players of the week. First up on offense, how about Gilmer senior running back Brand Webb, who's been a frustrating season for him. He's kind of been in and out of the lineup with injuries all year long. But, man, when they needed him the most in the playoff opener last week, the Buckeyes got a huge performance. 33 carries, 265 yards, 2 touchdowns, and Gilmer's 38-24 win over previously unbeaten Sunnyvale. Congratulations to Brand Webb, our offensive player of the week.
Yeah, and on defense, we've got Pleasant Grove defensive tackle Marcus Burris. 6 tackles, 4 for loss, but 3 sacks and a forced fumble in their 56-12 victory over Dallas Roosevelt. So
big for Burris to step up with Landon Jackson being out on that defensive line for Pleasant Grove.
Yeah, so that's a big hole to fill, but 3 sacks and a forced fumble, I mean, you'll take that.
That's getting it done. So once again, congratulations to our offensive and defensive players of the week. Well, that's going to do it. Be sure to visit ETSN.fm this week for all the previews of all the big games going on in East Texas in the second round of the playoffs, and be sure to download our free ETSN mobile app. It's available right now at the App Store and at Google Play. It's the best way to keep track of all the action live on Friday nights or Saturday in this case with the playoffs. If you have any questions or comments, like always, you can leave them in the comment section below, or you can hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Clint Buckley. He's at Chandler Vessels. Also, ETSN.fm is our main account. You can get in touch with us there as well. All right, so that's going to do it. Everyone have a very healthy and safe and fun Thanksgiving weekend, and we will talk to you again next week.